also the coordinator of the doctoral program in English, French, Spanish, contrastive and comparative studies offered by the graduate school. And well, I will be your host and moderator for today's session. We have an exciting agenda ahead of us, packed with valuable insights and practical tips to enhance your research skills. As you know, the title of the webinar is Exploring Qualitative Data Coding Approaches and Challenges. And let me remind you very briefly how it will be organized so everybody knows what to do. First of all, the speaker will provide us with an overview of the study that you received by email already. Then he will discuss the research methods used. So while he is doing this, please take note of any questions or comments that come to mind during this part and submit them through the Zoom chat, as we'll have dedicated time for discussion later on. After his presentation, we will move on to group work, where you will have the opportunity to share your ideas with your group before sharing them with the rest of the participants. And finally, the guest speaker will address the comments and questions submitted through the chat box before concluding the webinar. So, without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker, Robert O'Dowd, a distinguished full professor of English studies at our university, who brings a wealth of expertise in the application of virtual exchange in higher education, with numerous publications and keynote presentations at international conferences around the world. He currently leads the Erasmus Plus European Policy Experiment, Virtual Innovation and Support Networks for Teachers, Valiant, and his most recent book is in Internationalizing Higher Education and the Role of Virtual Exchange, which I would recommend. Robert, we are delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you, Anna.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for organizing these events. Okay, so this is the first time that we're having an event like this as part of the program. So I'm honored that I'm allowed to be the first person to lead this event. First of all, could I just find out a little bit about who is listening here? I know a lot of faces here this morning, but there are some people I don't know so well. So I just wanted very quickly to ask you all to type into the chat, right, what country you're from. Okay, don't hit enter. Okay, just type the name of the country where you are at the moment, right? And then when I tell you, you can hit enter, and we'll have like a waterfall of all of your answers coming out. Okay, so for the moment, just type the country where you are at the moment. I won't ask you where you're from, because then it probably gets very, very complicated in these international things. Okay, so you ready? Everybody hit enter and say where you are from. And there's our waterfall. Look at that. Okay. All right. So lots of people from Spain, but I also see somebody from Iraq. Ahmed, we heard you're very welcome. Adeline from France. What other countries do we hear? Brazil. Who's from Laura? Where's Laura? Well done, Laura. What time is it in Brazil right now, Laura?
It's 5 a.m.
5 a.m. Oh God, I feel very bad. I hope this is going to be of use to you. Otherwise, I'm not going to be popular in Brazil today. Okay. From Finland as well. Avril, you're very welcome. From England. Finland, two people from Finland. Austria as well. Sophia. Where's Sophia? Hi, Sophia. Where are you in Austria?
In Vienna at the moment.
In Vienna, beautiful Vienna. Well done. Okay, very good. And what a Poland as well. Okay, so we have a nice international representation here. You guys are very welcome. Okay. Could I ask you by raising your hand? Okay, you raising your hand literally by this. Okay, or by using the reaction button in Zoom. You can raise your hand that way too. If you are doing your PhD right now, who is doing their PhD right now? My God, a lot. There's a lot of people. Very good. Okay, well, that's good, because this is our, shall we say, our target audience this morning. All right, these are or this afternoon. This is the audience that we're hoping to reach. Okay, so I'm delighted. You guys are very welcome as well. Okay, and one more question, and again, you can raise your hands in some way. How many of you know what virtual exchange means? How many of you know what virtual exchange means? Okay, all right. But there's some of you that maybe not so familiar with this as well. Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to keep on letting people in. And what we're going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to introduce what I'm talking about today. Okay, so bear with me for a second. Okay, so what are my plans for today, right? Well, first of all, I'm going to begin by explaining what I mean by virtual exchange, okay? Because that's what the study that you were sent, that's what it's all about. That's what I've been researching. And that's how how I use qualitative coding. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'll talk to you a little bit briefly as well about my study, but not too much, because if you've already read the article or at least glanced through it, you'll have an idea already about what it was about. Okay, I think most of you are here because you're interested in learning more about qualitative coding methods. Okay, how that works. And I'm going to be very honest with you, and I'm going to say that this is a very effective method. I think it can be very useful, but it has lots of challenges as well. Okay, and I want to try and point these out to you, because if you, as a researcher, no matter what you are researching, no matter what method you use, you always have to take a critical approach about your methods and be very aware of their strong points, but also their weaknesses as well. Okay, and their challenges that come with them. All right, so that's what we're going to be talking about today as much as possible in the next half an hour. Okay, I try not to talk too much more than half an hour, because after that people get restless. Fair enough, right? So first of all, what do we mean by virtual exchange? Okay, well, virtual exchange is very brief, very simply the idea of bringing classes of learners online in contact together in order to learn about each other's cultures, to maybe practice each other's languages, to develop digital skills and collaboration skills, okay? And what we say is that not only is it about bringing these groups of students together, but it is also about, and I've got to keep on leaving people in, excuse me, but it's also about integrating that into your classes. Okay, so if you're a teacher, that you go to the trouble of finding out how to give students grades for doing their work, and you as a teacher, you provide guidance to them. All right, you help them to learn from these interactions. You give them advice about how to interact online, how to interpret what their partners are telling them, and things like that. So you as a teacher become a guide on the side, really, during these projects, but an important role as well. Okay, now. So that's virtual exchange, all right? Why do we do this, okay? And I think some of you that are here today have already done virtual exchanges. And these are probably the main reasons why teachers, especially foreign language teachers, but also teachers in other subjects as well, this is why we do it, okay? We believe that it develops students' foreign languages, foreign language competence. It can develop their intercultural competence, or their what we now call global citizenship, which is a related term to intercultural competence, but it's more about not only being good at interacting interculturally, but also being active global citizens, okay, and making an impact in your region and in the world, okay, through using your skills. Digital competence, of course, because students are using online tools such as Zoom, but also text-based tools to communicate and collaborate together. So that's an important thing that they have to learn as well. And also, very important nowadays for the job market, virtual exchange can help you develop skills such as collaboration, time management, problem solving. Okay, these type of problems, because when you are working in international groups, you don't have a choice but to learn and develop these skills, I think. Okay, so that's why we do it. All right, now the challenge, okay, our problem, okay, how can we find out how students develop their foreign language skills and global competence during their virtual exchanges? Okay, that is the, I would say the large majority of publications of research about virtual exchange basically come to this, finding out if and how students develop their foreign language skills, and if and how they develop their intercultural and global competence during their virtual exchanges. And sometimes to help us with that, right? What researchers do is that they take frameworks, pre-existing frameworks of descriptions of, in this case, the Council of Europe's competences for democratic culture. This is the one that I used when I was working on that article. This is a framework, like you can see here now, with the different values, attitudes, skills, and knowledge that that learners need in order to be active global citizens. Okay, And while I take a quick drink of water, I'll let you have a quick look at those different values and attitudes. Okay, so you get the idea about what's going on here. Okay, you've got linguistic skills, of course, communicative skills, you've got cooperation skills, but you also need the right attitudes as well, okay, and the right values, which refers to then, valuing cultural diversity, respect, empathy, okay, all of these areas. Okay, so this gives us an idea. This helps educators find out, okay, this is what I'm trying to develop in my students, right? Now, in order to find out if virtual exchange helps to develop those competences, right? What I took with the data I use was 345 learner portfolios, okay, that were written by Spanish students here at the University of León that had taken part in one of 13 virtual exchanges, okay, over a 4-year period. Now, every virtual exchange is different. First of all, we have to recognize that. However, I think I was able to use them all in the same data set because they had a certain collection of things in common, shall we say, all right? All of the exchanges lasted 6 to 8 weeks. All the students worked in working groups, small working groups, and with their international partners. The communication took place outside of class time, and they used both text-based and video conferencing sessions, okay, to do the work. So in all of those 13 exchanges, all of those things were in common. So I was able to say, or I tried to say at least, all of these virtual exchanges represent one approach to how virtual exchange is done. Let's see if we can see certain, if we can identify what students learn in general, shall we say, from this type of virtual exchange, okay? And now, we're going to talk in a couple of minutes about data and things like that and data sources. But what I did was I took the virtual exchange portfolios and looked at them and analyzed them. Okay, students were always asked at the end of their exchange to submit a portfolio and to reflect on what they had learned from this learning experience. Okay, so in a portfolio, what I always ask students to do is, first of all, say, okay, show me what you did, because as a teacher, I cannot see what all my students are doing in their virtual exchanges. I cannot be in all their Zoom meetings. I cannot see all their interactions in WhatsApp via email. So I asked them in the portfolio to say, look, show me that you've participated successfully. All right. So you get things like this, where you have students saying, well, we did this task, this is what we did, there's an image of us meeting together, etc., etc. But then very importantly, at the end, what I did was I would always ask them, write your concluding comments and reflections about certain things, okay? And what were the most important things you learned from this project, okay? And well, in this case, we asked them about feeling European because there was a specific a task about being European there, okay? But in general, at the end, there was always a stage where students had to reflect on what they learned, what they were taking away from the project, okay? And I would provide them with guiding questions about that, all right? Now, let's stop for a minute and think, okay? You are a researcher. You want to find out, what students are learning, okay? But what are the challenges when dealing with this type of data set? You have, like I said, what did I say? 300 and let's go back again. 345 portfolios, okay? Does anybody want to type into the chat? What do you think the challenges or the problems with this type of data set involves? Okay, could you type into the chat some ideas? And maybe Anna, if you can see them, maybe you could tell us what people are saying, because I can't see this very well. Anna, you there?
Yes, I am here, but
Okay.
I cannot see any messages yet.
Okay. Well, let's see if anybody puts in
yes,
some ideas.
I can see some now. Yes, quantity, lack of a structure, same ideas in different places, creating the corpus on a suitable tool, creating tags, not homogeneous data, cultural differences. Interesting, very interesting. Yes, managing quite a huge amount of information and selecting relevant data. Uh-huh.
That is the big problem. That
Too
is the
much
big
data
problem.
for one person, subjectivity, exactly.
Very good. Very good. Okay, hang on, we'll
Huge
just put this
data to
colleague
analyze
in.
for a human being. Yeah.
Could I ask everybody else apart from Anna to silent their microphones? Moshlepur, can you silent your microphone, please?
Yes. Okay. Finding out statistically significant data.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, that's enough. That's good. Right. We'll
Reflection
stop there.
skills. There's more comments. Creating a scheme to apply as a standard for data coding, since you would have to develop principles applicable to qualitative data, which is less concrete than quantitative data. Takes too much time, too much to analyze. Well, the issue.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we're getting the general ideas. Okay.
Yes.
The first thing is the huge amount of data that you're dealing with. Okay. So maybe these portfolios were between 10 or up to 20 pages long. Okay, of text. So there's the issue of, how do you identify, or how do you go about dealing with so much data? The second thing, which somebody else pointed out, is the reliability of, the danger is that you could be very subjective when looking at this type of data and just look for what you want, okay? What they call cherry picking, right? Which is a very common term that is thrown at qualitative analysis, okay? So let's continue, right? And let's continue looking at this, right? So what research what research methods can we use to establish what learning has taken place during an activity or in a project, okay? And well, in virtual exchange, the most common, I would say, approaches or methods for analyzing data are the following, right? You can have interviews, so sitting down and actually talking to students about their experiences. Case studies. You can have also. Okay, let me see if I can silence Moshlepur, because he doesn't seem to be realizing that everybody can hear him. Bear with me for a second. Okay. So yeah, we have interactional analysis, which is actually looking at, the interactions, looking at the Zoom recordings, transcribing them and analyzing them, or looking at the forums and where the interaction is happening. Okay. But probably the most common one, the most popular one, and the one where, for example, when you're working for example, organizations or governments or the European Commission, and they are looking for a study with findings about something, what they want is quantitative pre-post surveys. Okay. Now, what these involve in, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with them, is the idea is that you give students or participants a survey before they do an activity, in this case, the virtual exchange, and then you give it to them again afterwards. And you are hoping that how they talk about themselves will have evolved thanks to the participation in the virtual exchange. Okay, let me show you an example, right? Here is a typical one that we have used in the past in one of our virtual exchange projects. So you give the participants a set of statements. For example, I know how to solve my own technical problems. I can learn technology easily. I keep up with important new technologies. And they decide if they strongly disagree, or strongly agree, etc., etc. Or you can also nowadays very often do it like this. You give them again the statements. I am able to work in teams to solve problems collaboratively. I'm good at keeping deadlines, and they have to pull the bar towards, how much they agree or disagree with this. Okay. And then you have your results, which show that before doing the virtual exchange, they scored maybe a 60 or 65, and after the virtual exchange, then they scored a 75. Okay. On these scales, and that demonstrates supposedly the impact of the virtual exchange. Okay, now like I said, I have taken part in many studies where we have used these, and I work with people that are very, very good at developing these type of pre-post tests and this kind of quantitative data. But I personally have issues with them, okay? Maybe this is one of the things we can talk about later, okay? But I see there are certain limitations or weaknesses to this approach, okay? First of all, you need a very large data set in order for the results to be significant, okay? It's very, it's if you only do this with maybe 10, 12 students, then it's very difficult to demonstrate that the results are significant, okay? For me, the big problem is the limitations of self-reporting. It's that you are asking somebody to say how good they are at something. That doesn't mean that they are that good at it. Okay, that's for me the big issue. They are not demonstrating that they are very good with new technologies or they are very good with collaborating with people. The problem is they are saying, I think I am. Okay, so it's self-reporting. And what we have seen a lot of in these studies is that there is a danger among participants to overestimate their level of competence in the pretest. Okay, so for example, before the virtual exchange, you say you ask them to say, how much do you agree with this statement? I am very good at collaborating with international people from other cultures online, and they all say, 9 out of 10 or strongly agree. Okay, then they go and do the virtual exchange, and then they realize they're not so good at it. But they realize that it's actually more difficult than they imagined, and they have a lot more to learn. So you give them the post-test, and instead of saying strongly agree, now they're much lower. Okay. So what you actually have is, instead of showing the virtual exchange showing a growth in competence, it seems to be showing a decline in competence. Okay. But if you think about it, that actually show it in one way. It shows impact too, because it makes people realize that they are actually not as good as they thought they were. Okay, so there is a positive impact there, but that isn't clear from the actual results. Okay, so this is a thing we have to keep in mind. Obviously, in these type of studies, you should also have a control group. Okay, a control group is those that do the pre and post test, but without doing the virtual exchange. And that way, you can say that, okay, the students that did the virtual exchange, they improved by 20 or 10% or whatever it is. And those that didn't do the virtual exchange only improved by 5% or something like that. Okay, or ideally they would stay the same, all right? So you need that, and that for PhD students can be very difficult sometimes to get access to control groups. Okay. And finally, and this is relating to my own specific case, can we realistically expect scores to rise dramatically over a 6 to 8 virtual exchange, 6 to 8 week virtual exchange? It's very hard to expect scores to rise dramatically, for impact to be shown statistically as being very dramatic when you're doing a virtual exchange, which is maybe meeting these online partners once, twice a week. It's not going to, have a huge impact on their competences like that. Okay, so I think these are the issues that I have with it. So this is what brings us now to qualitative approaches and qualitative coding. Okay, but let's first of all explain what we mean by it. Okay, and I insist that this is an introductory talk. Okay, we're talking here on fairly general levels, all right? But I just want to give you an overall idea about how this works. So what is qualitative data coding? Okay, qualitative coding is a process of systematically categorizing excerpts in your qualitative data in order to find themes and patterns. Okay, so what you are doing is you are organizing all of your data into certain codes. Okay, and what are codes? Well, a code is basically a name or a label that you give to a piece of text. Okay, so you look on the right hand side there, you have a picture where the researcher is applying certain codes to certain pieces of text depending to what they are talking about. Okay, and the idea is that through coding, especially in thematic analysis, right, which is one form of qualitative coding, that you will identify themes in your research. Okay, a theme is a pattern, a trend, a concept that you have identified in your codes. Okay, so the idea is to code your data and use those codes to create themes. Okay, Now, why use qualitative coding? All right, well, different reasons, I think. First of all, it's useful when working with large bodies of data, okay? You can divide and categorize large amount of data in a way that is more accessible. It increases the opportunities of discovering issues which you had not originally considered. Because, for example, in quantitative, in those pre-post tests, you have to decide beforehand what are the statements you are asking the participants to evaluate. And so you are kind of imposing from the beginning what you think they should be learning, okay? With qualitative approaches, you are looking at the data and you are looking to identify things that are in that data. So you're not imposing as much, okay? It's also useful looking for subjective information, participants' experiences, their views, their opinions, okay? And I think this is really important, and this might be important as well for students that are not only working in foreign applied linguistics, but also those of you that are looking at literature. It avoids the risk of making your qualitative analysis anecdotal, okay, and not serious, because the charge that quantitative analysis of researchers always throw in the face of qualitative analysis is that what we do isn't serious, in the sense that it's cherry picking. You just go through the text, the data that you're looking, and you find some quotes that suit what you want to say, and you cherry pick them, right? You take them out, all right? If you're doing a rigorous qualitative coding, there is less chance of that happening, okay? Now, there are two general approaches to qualitative coding. A deductive approach, okay, which means that you start with codes, and then you come to your material, your data, and you apply those codes to the data, okay? So for example, if I start with this framework of the competences of democratic culture that I showed you earlier, I can use those different values, different attitudes, different skills as my codes, and I can apply them to the data, right? However, there is also an inductive approach, which is where you don't use a framework. Maybe because of what you are looking for, there's no pre-existing framework or model that you can apply, okay? So you start with the data, you read it, you become familiar with it, okay? And you start creating your own codes, okay? From the data and from what you are finding, okay? So there are two different ways to go about doing this. There is also different methods of qualitative coding, such as thematic analysis and qualitative analysis, qualitative content analysis. Okay, this is different. We'll come back to that towards the end of our talk. Okay, so what I did in my talk here was to try and combine both approaches, okay? So I started off with I used the framework that I had, the competences for democratic culture. I used that to have some initial codes, okay? But then I also saw in the data other things that were important, that I figured that were significant, and I added them as well through codes. Okay, so what I did was this. First of all, you have to familiarize yourself with your data. That means you take all your portfolios or all your essays or all your interviews or whatever qualitative data you have, and you read through it and you get a feel for it and you see what's important with people, what keeps coming up already, okay? And then the next step is to carry out a structural or basic coding, okay? Where you apply basic codes, such in my case, knowledge, language, collaboration, okay? And you come up with a basic set of codes. And what I use to do that is a software called NVivo that maybe some of you have seen. But if you're going to do qualitative coding, you have a large data set, you are going to need some kind of qualitative analysis software, okay? This is the one I'm familiar with, but I know that there are other ones. I think the University of León, for example, has other ones that are already paid for that you can access. But very simply, what these do is you put all of your data into them. And as you can see, you highlight aspects of your text and you create a code that is connected to that. And then when you have done that for quite an amount of data, it would give it back to you in different ways, okay? But for example, here I had a code that was called empathy. And here you have extracts from the portfolios that I identified as being relevant for the code empathy, okay? And it also tells you where they're coming from, right? Whatever. So the second step, okay, once you've done that in qualitative coding, is you do a second round of coding, which is called fine coding, which is like you go into more detail, right? So for example, my initial code was collaboration, but when I looked at everything that I had coded as collaboration, I was able to break those parts of coded text into subcodes. For example, collaboration skills, conflict resolution, cooperation, not collaboration, okay? Conflict avoidance, right? So different things that were coming up, right? And by the end of having done that, I was able to create what they call a code book. And a code book looks like this. You have on the left-hand side your codes. You show a representative example of what you mean by that code. And this is possibly controversial, I also put the number of times, a number of portfolios where these codes were identified, okay? Now, I say that this is possibly controversial, and we'll see why in a minute, okay? The fact that I've added the number of codes, and I'll try to explain why I did it like that, right? Then, finally, step 3, you need to check for the reliability of your codes, okay? Somebody mentioned earlier one of the challenges about this kind of coding portfolios or coding qualitative data is that you risk being too subjective and that you impose your analysis on the data. You're kind of imposing what you want to find on the data. And for that, what normally people do is, researchers do, is they look for a second coder, okay? Now, there's either two ways of doing that. And again, I'm going to explain that in a couple of seconds, how that can be done, okay? But once that stage is done, you then, and you're happy with your codes and your codes are seen as acceptable, you use your codes to create themes, okay, which are kind of like the main points from your analysis, okay? You bring the ideas together. So for example, in my study, I came up with 5 different themes based on my coding. For example, the impact of the personalized nature of virtual exchange on students' learning, how virtual exchange can contribute to students developing awareness of interactional norms. And if you read the article, you'll see what I mean by these themes, okay? But these are kind of like summaries of the main aspects that the coding had identified, well, had allowed me to identify. Okay, now, so that's that, right? But I want now to look for a second at, shall we say, the challenges or the issues or the debating points, okay? How am I doing for time? And I'm not going too far over time, am I? I've got another 5 minutes or so, I think, don't I? Yeah, about 5 minutes. So I'll go as quickly as I can. The first issue, counting codes. Like I said, I pointed out to you earlier that what I did was I identified the number of portfolios where those codes had been counted, okay? Depending on the type of qualitative coding you do, qualitative analysis you do, you will or you won't count codes. Now, if it's thematic analysis or grounded theory, these type of studies don't normally equate frequency with relevance, okay? And however, if you do qualitative content analysis, it does include frequency tables, okay? My reaction to this, my belief is that if I code all of this documentation and one code comes up 138 times and another code only comes up 4 or 5 times, then it's impossible for me not to say that, it's impossible for me to say that both are equally significant, okay? I can't go along with that, okay? Now, there are qualitative researchers that will argue against this, okay? But one thing, at least, if you are going to count the number of codes when you're coding, I would suggest is that you code carefully, in the sense that just because somebody mentions a topic doesn't mean it has to be coded to that topic. I was looking here for evidence of learning, okay? So I tried to focus on comments where people said, students said in their portfolios, in the virtual exchange, I realized that, or I learned that, or this showed me that, okay? And there for me was worth one code of one instance of coding of a certain code. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, ensuring reliability. Okay, this whole issue of getting a second coder. Okay, in the big studies that I did, for example, in the Valiant project that Anna mentioned and we've just finished last month, we did an awful lot of coding and an awful lot of data was done. And what we did, because we had a big team, was that one person would code a certain amount of the would code all of the data, and a second coder would come and code 20% of it. Okay, 20%, and then in NVivo, what we were able to do is we were able to upload the coding that had been done by the two people, and NVivo will tell you what percentage of coincidence is there between the two sets of coding. Okay, so what you should be aiming for, I think, is 80%. I think 80% is established, is that that shows reliability. Now, you're a poor PhD student. You're not part of a research team. What do you do? Well, what I've asked my own PhD students, okay, Begoña and Angela, who's here this morning, is I've asked them to help each other. Okay. And, for them to look at a certain amount of each other's coding and to be, like an external expert, so to say, saying, well, I don't really agree that this belongs to this code and stuff like that. Okay. Saldana, one of the books that I'm going to recommend at the end of this talk, recommends that, that they have rigorous examiners and auditors of my analysis. Okay. Showing people your code book and getting them to criticize it and argue with it, with you about it. Okay. Moving on quickly. Probably the another big theme, a big issue that comes up is that when you are writing your analysis, do never say that that themes emerged from the data. Okay, there is there's a tendency that when people do qualitative analysis, they say that I discovered themes and concepts that were embedded in the interviews, or this finding emerged from the data, or I discovered in the data. And when you do that, when you say that, it's totally ignoring your agency and what you are bringing to the analysis. What you are saying is that the truth is somehow hidden inside the data, and it's your job to find it. And we all know that that isn't how it works. Okay, what we are doing is we are imposing more or less our analysis on the data. All right. So instead of saying that themes emerge from the data, what you should say is that themes were generated, they were identified, or they were constructed by the researcher. Okay, that's a much more honest way of doing it. Okay. So to conclude, because I realize now I'm also running out of time. There are different approaches to qualitative coding. Things to keep in mind. Things that you guys should be doing if you're going to think you're going to do this. There are different approaches that I've mentioned. Thematic analysis and content analysis are the two main ones, I think. Read more about them and decide which one suits your approach and what you are trying to do. Okay. Get access to some sort of qualitative data analysis software like NVivo, right? And invest time, and you will need time, learning how to use it. There's lots of videos online explaining how these work. Maybe you have a colleague that knows that it works and has used it already, but you need to get used to it and to use it effectively. Okay. And like I said, find another researcher and work together to ensure reliability of your coding. So you do it for them and they will do it for you. Okay. You work like that. All right. So just to final thing, some reading if you want to get you started. There's a coding manual for qualitative researchers that is, I downloaded it for free. I found it for free online by Johnny Saldana, which is a really accessible book that's really worth reading. And if you're going using NVivo, there's a very good book, Qualitative Data Analysis with NVivo, okay, which is more recent as well. Now, there's also a link here about virtual exchange if you want to learn more about that. Okay. In any case, Anna, I think we can share a PDF of these slides with everybody afterwards, so they can use these slides and look back at them again if they want to. All right. So now,
Sure.
I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, because we don't have too much time.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you, Robert. Yes. Do you
Okay.
think that we can move on to breaking?
Yes, I would
other
suggest that we
topics?
look at we give everybody a chance now in the breakout rooms, if you want to tell them about that.
Okay, so before that, I have just shared a link to a discussion sheet in the chat. And this is a worksheet that Robert would like to share with you so that it can guide your discussion and capture any key insights and questions that may arise during your conversation. And once you are in your breakout rooms, please introduce yourselves and then refer to the discussion sheets for guidance on what to discuss, because you will find a number of questions there. I suggest you choose one person to report back on the main points of your discussion when we gather again as a full group. Perhaps you could select the person whose first name starts with the earliest letter in the alphabet, say Anna or Brian, whoever is the first letter. And then Robert will send you to your breakout rooms right now.
We're going to
Okay?
give them, and we're going to call you back just before 11 o'clock. Okay, so just a few minutes for you guys to think about what you've heard, to talk about your own experiences. Okay, and then at 11 o'clock, we'll come back, and for 15 minutes, then you can tell us what you've been discussing. We discuss any questions or issues that have come up. Okay.